All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. How's things going, Martyn?
Oh, great! Actually, Jake, it's we're now at the start of the playoffs this coming weekend. The regular season in England has been completed. Of course, we're well into the playoffs in Australia, aren't we? And there's lots of news. We've had the dream team revealed this week. We've got various bits of news coming out about players signing new contracts. We've got players committing themselves internationally to mainly to Australia, I've got to say, which is not necessarily great news for us in England, but it's all and the Ashes tour is on the horizon, so it's tremendously exciting, isn't it?
Mate, yeah, it's coming around quick. I know a lot of the attention in the media at the moment is, has Kevy reached out to this player to try and convince them to stay with
It
Australia?
looks as though he
And
has in a few cases.
yeah, yeah. The most recent one I heard, Katoni Staggs, apparently he's yet to make his mind up whether he'll opt to play for Tonga or Australia. I think Kevy reached out to him, and apparently Christian Wolf has also reached out to him. So I think he's just focused on getting through the rest of the finals, and then he'll make a decision. But as a Kangaroos Australian fan, mate, I hope he picks us, but I'll respect his decision.
Of course.
Um, but we will get to all of that a little bit later, mate. A pretty exciting end to the season over the weekend. Obviously, our top six is now decided. Hull FC, they sort of just missed out, obviously, but it's great to see Wakefield getting a chance, I guess.
Well, yeah. I mean, if we look at the games, the two Thursday night games last week, Hull just being pipped at home by Catalans 22-26 it was in the end. Interestingly, I was speaking to somebody earlier this week who was saying is a Hull supporter, but saying he was actually quite relieved not to be in the playoffs because Hull have got to the end of the season with a very badly depleted squad. A lot of injuries. They were just really limping, just struggling to get to the end of the season, really, with a lot of players in the team who probably wouldn't normally be in it if everybody was fit. And he thought that there might be sitting ducks if they were in the playoffs, and he thinks Wakefield are probably in a far stronger position than they are. So that's an interesting one. And amazingly enough, Catalans got their third successive win against Hull in their final three matches in the Super League, when it was unfortunately far too late for them to make an impact on the playoffs. If they'd been playing like that, throughout the season, they might have done a lot better. And but good for Joel Tompkins, the new coach there. He's at least got something now to build on for next year, and there will be having some really great new recruits next year, including Toby Sexton, who's obviously coming from Canterbury and is the sort of young halfback that I think they desperately need at Catalan. So I think a brighter future awaits them. And then we had the other game on Thursday night, Hull KR just beating Warrington, and what a thrilling game that was, really. I've written about Neil Hudgell, the Hull KR owner, who I admire enormously for everything he's done for that club since he bought the club in 2004. I mean, the greatest thing for Hull KR is that when Neil bought the club in 2004, they were not in Super League, they were in the second tier, and their average crowd was 2,186. And they've now more or less multiplied that figure by six, which is the most remarkable achievement, I think, by virtually any club in the game. Closely followed by Leigh, I've got to say, who were also in the second tier at that time. And they've also boosted their crowds by a figure of four or five, factor of four or five. So those two clubs, Hull KR and Leigh, have been fantastic success stories, Jake. And I was really pleased. I mean, I was pleased by two things in the Hull KR Warrington game. I was pleased to see Warrington playing with a lot more purpose and flair and so on, and certainly not giving up the ghost for what's been a terribly disappointing season. But secondly, I was pleased to see that Hull KR did win it in the end, because they deserve to win the League Leaders' Shield after what they've done all season. They looked a shadow of the side they did earlier in the year, by the way. But nonetheless, now that they've won it, that weight can be taken off their shoulders, so to speak. And I think they'll do a lot better with a 2-week rest before they start in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, it's like you said, great to see Warrington playing again. You could see the joy in Sam's face as they sort of, panned the camera up to him as some of his young fellas were going over to score.
It's funny actually, because we've got a feature in League Express highlights of the week, and one of the highlights we always put in is image of the week, and I was very tempted to put in Sam smiling, because he's not had much to smile about in recent weeks, and it was great to
Yeah,
see him looking happy, and not just smiling, but looking really, jumping up and down, and obviously sharing in the pleasure of some of the tries that they scored. Um, but we actually went for, obviously, the image of the week was Hull KR receiving the League Leaders Shield. That had to be the image of the week, really. But it was great to see Sam looking animated and so keen. And we'll see where. I mean, he's obviously still going to be there next year, and hopefully a much better season awaits for them with a bit of luck.
yeah, absolutely, mate. And on the flip side, Hull KR, there's some concerns. Do you feel like they're starting to run out of steam, or do you think
Well, I
now
think
that
they
they've
did
gotten
run
the
out of
shield?
steam.
Hmm.
I think they did run out of steam, but I think what they needed was a bit of a rest, to be honest. I think it's been because they won the Challenge Cup, they've played in every single week of Super League bar one, when there was one round, I think in July, that was split over 2 weeks. Um, but apart from that, they've had no rest whatsoever, and it's a long season. I just don't think that you can play at your best for 27 rounds of a competition, and then for the Challenge Cup rounds as well. So it's just ridiculous to think that you can. So I think, as I say, with Hull KR now having that week off, which they badly needed, they will come back and play um, probably either Leeds, St Helens, or Wakefield in the playoff, depending on how the other results go this weekend. So I think they'll be up for it, and I think they'll. I think we'll see a different Hull KR in the playoffs. To be honest, Jake.
Yep. Mate, the other one, obviously, Wigan, they seem to be continuing on that upward trajectory. Obviously, a good win over Leeds on the weekend. Do you feel like they're really starting to build into the right end
Well,
of the year?
Wigan are just dangerous, aren't they, to anybody? Wigan seem to know how to peak at just the right time, and they finished second, so they will also have a week off this year. Or next week, should I say? And gosh, I think they'll be dangerous, and obviously Bevan French is such an incredible player, and combining with Jay Field, you've got to say I think they're probably the favourites to win the competition again, but who knows? And not strong favourites, not clear favourites, but marginal favourites, I think. But if I had to put my money anywhere, it would be on Wigan winning at Old Trafford on October the 11th.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think Leeds will be unhappy with how they played over the weekend, mate? Obviously, they've had such a great year compared to last season. Do you think this will take their confidence will take a bit of a hit after that
No, I don't think
performance?
so. No, I don't think so. Leeds will. I mean, they lost 22 points to 6. They were 12-0 down at half time, but they did score a try through Chris Hankinson. And the crucial thing is that Jake Connor, who's been their motor really for much of the season, he was missing from the side, as was Lackey Miller. Now, when you take away those two incredible attacking threats out of the Leeds side, inevitably Leeds, don't attack as well without those two players. But they'll both be back this Saturday for St Helens, and that makes it a terrific prospect. And I think it would make Leeds the favourites to beat Saints on Saturday. But it's going to be an absolutely fantastic game. There's no doubt about that.
And just on St Helens, mate, they had a bit of a tight match up against Castleford. They won 26 points to 24. What did you?
Well, they had a few players out again at St Helens. It was actually a game that didn't mean that much for St Helens because they were going to finish in fifth place regardless of the results. And on the other hand, it was an opportunity for Castleford's players to show in the last game of the season that they're not as bad as their place in the league might suggest, because they've now finished in 11th place, which is incredibly disappointing for them, of course. But they've. I don't think they're as bad as that position suggests, but positions don't lie, do they? And they're the 11th best team in the league this season, according to the league table. But Saints, the thing that surprised me, I've got to say, the thing that surprised me, Jake, for St Helens, and I've written about it in my column this week, was that their coach Paul Wellens didn't give a run out to young George Whitby at halfback, because George Whitby has got a fantastic kicking game, and I mean he's only still a teenager, but his kicking game is brilliant and better than that of any other St Helens player, in my opinion. And I was surprised, therefore, that they didn't give him a run out. And he actually played at the weekend for Halifax in the championship playoff game at Oldham. And it's no surprise, incidentally, that Halifax went to Oldham and beat Oldham 40 points to 4, with George Whitby the absolute star of the show. George Whitby was the player of the match. His kicking game absolutely crucified Oldham. Everybody thought Oldham would probably win that game, but because Halifax were able to draw on Whitby because of this dual registration with St Helens, they, just were always going to win that game. And I mean, there's a lot of controversy about the dual registration system and whether players ought to be able to swap clubs in the way that they do, particularly at playoff time, because Whitby playing for Halifax inordinately strengthened their side. You've got to say, and it almost seems a bit unfair on Oldham, really. But that's the way the system works. But I still think we've not seen the squads yet for the playoff games this weekend. But I'd be amazed in some respects if Whitby doesn't make the 17 somewhere for St Helens this at Leeds on Saturday.
Yeah, that's one hell of a favour Paul Wellens has given to Halifax there.
Certainly is,
Uh,
yes.
I sympathise with the Oldham fans. I'm sure they're probably scratching their heads. Um, but yeah, mate, I'm sure if he keeps up those performances, like you said, he'll get a call up if needed for the Saints. But mate, why don't we take a look at some of the big talking points before we get into obviously this weekend's matchups? The big one being the Super League Dream Team being announced now. I've got the list here beside me.
There's one
Jake
name missing.
Connor.
Can you see which name is? Well, in fact, yes, there is one big name missing. Can you see which one it is?
I was going to say Bevan French, but
Of course.
you know,
Yeah.
I guess he's missed. He's been spent a little bit of time on the sidelines though, hasn't he? Which
Yes.
obviously affects
Yes.
it. But um, you know, in the halves there, Jake Connor and Mikey Lewis. I'm sure most people would agree that they've been pretty consistent all year
Oh gosh,
round
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
deserve their places, right?
Yes, absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Is there any players, obviously apart from Bevan French, who's missing, but is there any players you feel like have been a little bit hard done by Martin, or you think could have earned a spot on that dream team?
Well, yeah, quite a few. Lucky Miller, obviously, at Leeds is a bit unlucky, but then again, the guy who's got the gig is Jay Field of Wigan, so you can hardly complain about Jay Field being in the in the squad. I was pleased to see Lewis Martin there, the Hull winger, and I was pleased to see Amila Hanley of Lee. I think he's been absolutely outstanding this year, and he's obviously pipped Jake Wardle, the Wigan centre, who I think is actually the best centre in the competition. But Jake Wardle has had to make way for Umila Hanley this year, which is, I think a great tribute to Umila Hanley. I think he's been absolutely terrific for Lee this year, and I was really pleased to see Dean Hadley getting in the squad. I think he's been brilliant for Wigan this year, and it's quite interesting that players like Umila Hanley and Dean Hadley were actually not named in the 31-man squad that Sean Wayne named a few weeks ago for England to face the Ashes, for the Ashes. So I think it's quite interesting that some of the players who we did name, obviously he named 31, so they can't all be in the dream team, but there are one or two players who are making the dream team who didn't actually get into that squad. Obviously, again, one of the guys who's not there, who's an outstanding player, is Edwin Apapi of Lee Leopards. But again, I don't think anybody could argue with Jez Litton, who's been absolutely first class for Hull KR, and has been a big part of their charge to the League Leaders Shield. So it's certainly possible to look at players who can feel a bit unlucky at not being in the squad. But I think, for example, Josh Thewlis on the wing for Warrington. Warrington have had a bad season, but Josh Thewlis, the Warrington winger, and his brother actually Jake on the other wing, have both been outstanding as far as I'm concerned. But there are always hard luck stories when it comes to the dream team, aren't there? And we could pick out quite a few, I'm fairly sure.
That's it. Just looking at the team here, doesn't look like there's any players from outside the top seven in that side.
No.
So, I think your team's performance does have a lot to do with your overall selection, doesn't it? I mean, it's hard to shine in a team that's doing badly.
No doubt about it. I mean, another player who's been outstanding this year is Mason Leno of Wakefield, who's played a great part in Wakefield's success. And but again, he's a half-back, and the two selected are Connor and Lewis, who I don't think, as I say, you couldn't really argue against those two. Although, as I say, I think Bevan French not being in the squad is pretty eye-opening, really. But where do you fit him in?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say from this list, do you think it gives us any hint into perhaps who's going to get the Man of Steel award? I know Jake Connor he was sort of the top of the leaderboard. I think Herman SASA was also top three.
The other player who's unlucky not to be in it, and who has won our Albert Goldthorpe medal this year after the regular season, is Lachlan Lamb of Lee Leopards, who must be a very strong contender also for the Man of Steel award. It's very often the case that the guy who wins the Albert Goldthorpe medal in League Express goes on to be named as the Man of Steel at the Man of Steel Awards night. So Lachlan Lamb, Jake Connor, I think those are probably the two strongest candidates for Man of Steel, and I think it's going to be probably fought out by those two players. Jake Connor came second in the Albert Goldthorpe medal table, and in a sense, that might be because he actually missed the final two games of the season, so couldn't accumulate any points, whereas Lachlan just accumulated enough points to jump over him. And Mikey Lewis came third, and the fourth in the list was Aidan Caesar of Hull KR, who's had a terrific season of Hull FC rather, and has had a terrific season with them, and has signed a contract extension for another year with Hull FC. So that's an interesting one, isn't it?
He's almost flew under the radar a little bit. I feel like we haven't really discussed him too much on the podcast, but obviously we're aware of how well he's playing. But he just sort of, seems to just play at that same level week in and week out, and maybe we take it for granted.
I think Aidan Caesar is a very important figure for Hull FC because not only is he a very good player, but he's a very strong personality, and I think he is the sort of player who probably whips the other players into shape a bit, and is probably a great asset for the coach, John Cartwright, I would have thought. And I think they share a view about how the game should be played. So I think he was a great signing for Hull FC. And I mean, obviously, he's getting to the end of his career fairly soon. And some people might have been surprised that he actually signed for Hull FC after having gone back to Australia to West Tigers. But he's been a tremendous asset for them this year, and they're going to be markedly stronger next year, I think, with the players they've signed. So I think he obviously wants to stay at the club to be part of any potential success that they'll enjoy next year.
No, definitely, mate. Now, Martin, usually we like to touch on a few things that you've written about in your column from League Express, but you've also got a column in the Rugby League World magazine, the September edition,
Yes.
you'd like to touch on. You've got a nines proposal, mate. What can you tell us about the article and the nines proposal, and I guess, how we can look at growing our game with that proposal?
Well, the thing is that when IMG came on board in May 2022, they were announced. They said they were going to create a new property for Super League that would have value, and that Super League would be able to develop and monetize. But that doesn't seem to have appeared. They don't seem to have done anything. So I thought, well, I'm a great supporter of Nines Rugby League. I think Nines Rugby League is a terrific concept, and I would like to see Super League developing a Nines tournament as a sort of a bit like the 100 in cricket, a short form version of the game where, it might be something like 9 minutes each way, and you could play lots of games on a single afternoon and evening. And my thought is that the rugby league season actually begins in springtime, lasts throughout the summer, and goes into autumn. And during that period, there are 4 bank holiday Mondays. There's Easter Monday, Bank Holiday Monday at the start of May, Bank Holiday Monday at the end of May, and then the Bank Holiday at the end of August. So there are 4 Bank Holiday Mondays during our season, none of which do we currently play any games on. We don't. We've got those days when potentially lots of people are on holiday, are not working, but we don't have anything to offer them. So my idea is to involve all 14 Super League clubs playing 7 matches on Easter Monday, 7 matches on May Day Bank Holiday, and 7 matches at the end of May. 7 games at 3 different venues. The venues I suggested were somewhere like Lee, who put on such a great show, Wakefield and Hull KR, and create a sort of league table after 3 rounds, and the top 8 clubs from the league table, after clubs have had 3 games, the top 8 clubs go forward to a finals day, and that I would hold at Headingley on August Bank Holiday Monday, and there'd be another 7 games then, because you'd have 4 quarterfinals, 2 semi-finals, and a final. And one club would be crowned as the Super League Nines champions. And my proposal is that they would get a very substantial cash prize for that success, at least 100,000, probably more, to make it worthwhile. And I think lots of fans, because you'd be guaranteed seeing your club in action on the first 3 of those events on the at Easter and during the Maytime bank holidays. I think plenty of fans would go to those games on those particular days to actually generate quite a good crowd and quite a good atmosphere and so on. And I think you could have 4 terrific days out, and certainly the 8 clubs that reached the final, if it were held at Headingley, I think they would draw quite a good crowd. And at Headingley, of course, you've been to the corporate. You've enjoyed corporate hospitality at Headingley, I think. Um, you know they could make a lot of money from corporate hospitality as well for that event. So I've sent that proposal to quite a few people, and it's got a very positive response from most people. The only guy who probably wasn't quite so enthusiastic was Derek Beaumont, who's got his own ideas on a nines competition. So I think possibly he felt that, and he thought he wondered whether the cost would justify the event in a sense. Um, but Gary Hetherington, for example, was tremendously enthusiastic about it, and would certainly like to take it forward, and I think a few other people would do too. And and of course, some people might say, well, you're overexposing players. Could players really, actually deal with those sort of events after they've played at the weekend, for example? But the thing is, it's only a nines game would only be 18 minutes, and so it's not really like playing an 80-minute game. And also, it would give all the clubs the chance to play some players who might not perhaps be, getting into the match day 17. It would be a terrific chance for them to, show what some of their younger players in their squad were capable of doing. And I think nines is such an exciting concept. I used to love the NRL nines that were played in Auckland a few years ago, before the NRL stopped doing it. Then we had the World Cup nines in 2019 that were supposed to be a 4-yearly event, but were abandoned by the international governing body. So, for God's sake, we've seen how successful the 100 is in cricket. Let's create something, a short form version of the game that more people are going to be interested in, and will potentially have a wider reach than the standard 80-minute Super League game, exciting though that might be. Let's give people different alternatives for watching different versions of our great sport. And I think in the very long term, many, many years hence, long after I'll probably be departed, we ought to be aiming to get nines into things like the Olympics and so on, which, rugby union is succeeding with rugby union sevens, aren't they? They've developed their short form version of the game. I don't think rugby union sevens is anything like as exciting as rugby league nines, but nonetheless, they put time, money, and imagination into it, and we don't. That's the problem. We just chug
Yeah.
along in the same old way forever, and it just doesn't. It just doesn't. I mean, we'll keep doing the same things time and time again, but that doesn't. But that doesn't develop the game, does it?
Yeah, that's right, mate. It's almost like we're scared to try something new, and then when we do try something new, like when we had the Nines World Cup, if it's not an immediate success, it just tends to get abandoned, which, we should
Correct.
be investing to try and get it up to a level, at least give it a few years before you decide to
Absolutely.
chop it. But yeah, just a few things there you touched on, mate. Obviously, like the worries around player fatigue. We've always been advocates of shortening the regular season
Oh yeah.
to allow for other fixtures to take place, which would probably be something that we'd like to see come in to help, accommodate this. But as you said, if it's 9-minute halves, there's less players on the field. I feel like there's less risk of injury because you're not running into a wall of players. There's more
Yes.
one-on-one
Well,
tackles,
there's always a risk
two-on-one
of injury
tackles.
in rugby league, but I mean, you'd never play at all, would you, if you were worried
That's
if
right.
that was your prime concern?
Yeah, and I think you touched on as well, just the thing that excited me the most about the Auckland Lions is you would see all these young players coming through that you may not have heard of, and just to see them be unleashed on the field, especially if they're a fast outside back, and just seeing, how they tore up other NRL sides. And the other thing that we were speaking about before we hit record today, Martin, was some of the ex-players that would come back in play in
Brilliant.
those
Yeah,
nine
yeah.
tournaments? Like
Yeah,
you
that
mentioned,
would be
Brad
terrific.
Fittler.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
you could even specify that every team ought to have one player who, retired the previous year who just could come back just for that one, that just for the nines games. There are all sorts of things you could write into it to broaden the appeal, couldn't you? And this you could make it so exciting, I think. And I think if clubs like, I mean, there are several clubs in the Super League now that I think are really imaginative in the way they promote themselves. And I've cited Lee, Wakefield, and Hull KR. If those were the clubs that were hosting the nines, they could put on a rock group, prior to the tournament taking place. You could have all sorts of entertainment. You've got the Craven Street thing at Hull KR that draws people in. There's so many things that could make it a great bank holiday afternoon and evening. And let's go for it. Let's do something different, for God's sake. We 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 just instead of doing the same old thing. Not that the same old thing doesn't work well. I mean, we're talking about playoffs and so on at the moment, but just to occasionally do something different. Let's try it.
I'd love also like for the NRL to have like a replica or the same sort of comp happen here, and then perhaps the top three or four teams on either side could go and maybe fly and meet in somewhere like Singapore and have like
Oh
a
yeah,
playoff in a country that doesn't necessarily have rugby league as a popular sport. Maybe in Saudi Arabia, who knows? Get the
yeah. It
Saudis
might be a
on
bit
board.
hot there actually, but yeah, I
Air
do agree in
conditioned.
principle. Yeah.
But yeah, mate, and then I think in the past we've touched on as well, just like the ability to grow the game through nines. You see what's happened with America in the Olympics,
Well, I
their
think
rugby
on an
17.
international level, I mean, nines internationally could again. There are all sorts of things you could do. I mean, for example, there are so many players now. I think we've said this before. So many players now that have an African heritage. I mean, Cruz Leeming of Wigan was born in Africa, for example. Um, Junior and Samba I think, although he was born in England, I think his parents came from Cameroon. And so there are loads of players. Jaden Okunbo, who's playing for Bradford at the moment, he's another one with, I think, possibly Nigerian heritage. I'm not quite so sure, but there are lots of players. If you had an international tournament, you could have, America, North America, South America, Africa, Asia, Europe, and so on. You could almost have an intercontinental tournament, couldn't you? And there's, it gives enormous potential, really. But as with so many things, potential in rugby, we always talk about potential in rugby league, but so often potential isn't fulfilled, and that's disappointing, especially to me, because I put a lot of suggestions to the game about how it can develop further, and I do claim credit for the RFL adopting some of my ideas, but not necessarily all of them.
Just the ones that work, mate. Just the ones that work.
Yeah, well, I mean, without wanting to blow my own trumpet too much, mate, wrote, I banged on for years about wouldn't it be a great idea to switch to summer rugby, and the game eventually did do. And I then used to write strongly about wouldn't it be great to decide the champions by having a playoff and a grand final at a major venue. And Maurice Lindsay initially told me why that wouldn't work, but then suddenly changed his mind and decided it would work, and then we got it. So it as I say, some ideas tend to be adopted and some ideas are not. And but I would certainly hope that the nines idea would ultimately come to pass. Put it that way.
Yeah, we'll keep banging that drum, mate, and I'm
And I don't
sure.
even want, I mean, IMG are on about 450,000 a year. I wouldn't even demand payment for that idea, mate. I wouldn't, I'd let them have it for free.
Free advice. Absolutely, mate. I think a lot of the fans would be on the same page, mate. Yeah, I
Well,
don't
it'd
think
be
there'd be
interesting
many
to see
people that
what people
disagree.
say. in response to this podcast, if they, want to comment on it, we'd be very pleased to hear what they've got to say.
Yeah, and any suggestions they might have, they might have a better idea than we do.
Oh, they might. Oh,
Yeah,
well, most people think they do, don't they?
yeah, absolutely. All right, mate, we'll move into some of the other talking points of the week. Big one, London Broncos officially signed Jason Demetriou to a 3-year deal to take over as coach. They've also signed Reagan Campbell-Gillard as one of their first big name players to sign. I'm not sure though. I remember hearing him talk about this big marquee player that they had in mind. Do you think Campbell-Gillard fits that bill, or do you think there's another big name player that they have in
Oh,
mind
well,
they want to sign?
I think he may do. Um, yeah, no, I would certainly think it would take a fair few quid to get Reagan Campbell-Gillard to come and play for London Broncos, but um, good luck to him and good luck to the club. And it shows. What it shows is that signing Demetriou and signing Reagan Campbell-Gillard makes it clear that London Broncos are very serious about wanting to um, improve and get better, and they're very serious about this bid to get into Super League next year. There's no question about that, is there? So, and I mean, there's also been publicity this week about Warrington trying to sign Tom Trbojevic, which is an interesting one, isn't it? And that would be a typical Warrington signing in a sense, because people are saying they've offered Tom a 2-year deal, and Tom is an absolutely great player. There's no question about it. He's one of the greatest players in the world, in my view. But the problem with Tom is that he also carries a bit of injury baggage as well. And if Tom came and played for Warrington, if he could get through 2 full seasons without, incurring a significant injury, that would be an incredible achievement. And it's obviously what Warrington would be hoping for. But it's a bit of a gamble because he does have this record, doesn't he, of struggling with a lot of hamstring injuries. He seems to suffer from. And I would only hope that if Warrington did sign him, and I don't think it's been confirmed, no, and it might not happen, but if they did, I would certainly wish him and them the very best of luck, and that he could have an injury-free 2 years. And if he did, it'd be a sensational signing for them, and it would be I mean, he is an excitement machine as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's not quite Greg Inglis levels in terms of when Warrington signed Inglis, at the end of his career. Because I mean,
Nearly as
Trbojevic
so.
is,
Yeah, it's not far
yeah,
off.
yeah, that's right. I mean, I guess you could say Trbojevic is still he has age on his side, but yes, that injury list is quite worrying. But as
Mm.
you said, if you get 2 years of Tom Trbojevic fully fit, he'd be a great addition to the club. It'd just be a matter of where he plays in their side. Was he a centre? Obviously, got Matt Duffy at
Well,
fullback.
I think he prefers fullback, doesn't he? And I mean, who knows what will Warrington retain Matt Duffy? I'm not quite so sure. Maybe one or two of the other clubs that are coming into Super League might be potential. If Warrington wanted to sign Trbojevic and put him at fullback instead of Duffy, I dare say Duffy could probably find another club, because don't forget there are probably going to be 14 clubs in Super League next year, including 3 new ones. So I think that that is a possibility.
Yeah, definitely, mate. All right, Martin. The other thing you've sort of written about in your column this week, the playoff conundrum. Who are you picking this weekend, mate? Obviously, 2 very tough matches to pick from. I don't think I'd like to be a betting man this weekend.
Well, I think there are 3 teams that I think have been outstanding this year: Hull KR, Wigan, and Lee. I think Lee have finished in 3rd place, which is the highest place that the club has achieved in the Super League era. Um, I find it difficult to see Wakefield winning at Lee on Friday night, even though they did have a very convincing win earlier in the season when they went to Lee and won 40 points to 14, I think the score was. But I can't quite see that happening again. Wakefield are going to be without Max Jowett at full back. Fortunately, they've got a very capable deputy in Josh Rock, who's a very dangerous player, particularly in attack, of course. But if I'm honest about it, I think Wakefield will take a hell of a lot of support on Friday night. I think they've had 2,000 tickets and they've sold most of them, probably. So they'll certainly try and shout the house down, their fans. But I just can't quite see if Lee have had experience now of big games, haven't they? In the last 2 or 3 seasons. Obviously, they won the Challenge Cup in 23, and they were in the playoffs last year. They just got knocked out at the penultimate stage, and I think they will be very keen to progress. And if they do progress from this game, they'll go to Wigan in the in the final round of the playoffs in the semi-finals. So I think they'll be highly motivated. Wakefield will give them a good game. There's no doubt about that. I think Wakefield will be very competitive, but I can't quite see them pulling it off. But having said that, I wouldn't. If you asked me to put my life on the line, I wouldn't. I'd refuse to do it, mate, because I'm not that certain that Lee will win. I think it's probably something like 65-35 in favour of Lee. But, Wakefield have got plenty of strike power and they will, they'll give Lee a good game.
Yeah, on any given Sunday, mate, anyone can win, right? Saints Leeds, that's set to be a blockbuster.
Well, with Jake Kearnan, we said earlier, didn't we? Jake Kearnan and Lachie Miller coming back into the Leeds side. I think that might give them a bit too much creative power for St Helens, and St Helens attack has struggled for much of this season, and it's been a sort of strange year for St Helens. They've struggled against teams that are higher than them in the in the league, and they've lost 10 games altogether in Super League this year, and I think they've been unable to impose themselves on the other teams that are in the top six, apart from Wakefield. Wakefield are the only team in the top six that St Helens have been able to beat quite comfortably. And I think the trip to Leeds may be a trip too far. But I said earlier, if they bring back George Whitby and play him at halfback, his kicking game, I think, could potentially make a big difference. So I certainly won't write St Helens off, but I think Leeds are the definite favourites, and it's the first home playoff game for Leeds since, I think, is it 2017 or something? I can't quite remember now, but Leeds haven't had many home playoff games in recent years, so it's a thing for them to celebrate, and hopefully they'll get a great crowd, and it should be a thrilling atmosphere, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, mate. No, I'm bummed I won't be over there to see it. It would be a great atmosphere, I can imagine.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Now, the other thing you touched on, mate, is Wigan and the 14-team club debate. There were some reports that they'd called for a pause in the process of entering two teams. What's the latest on this, mate?
Well, I think they served a legal letter on the directors of Super League Europe, as I understand it, and I mean, Super League Europe is the body that has the power. I mean, it's a confused situation because the Rugby Football League is the governing body. The Rugby Football League is the governing body, but there are certain other organisations that are part of Rugby League that actually have specific powers. And one of them is that Super League Europe, which is a company, a private company with all the clubs in Super League being shareholders, plus the RFL being a shareholder. Super League Europe has the power to determine how many teams there will be in Super League, up to a maximum of 16. So they decided at their meeting in July that they actually carried a motion, an official motion, that Super League next year would would go to 14 teams. Wigan abstained from that vote, and the two Hull clubs, Hull KR and Hull FC, they voted that they would only go to 14 in 2027, but they were outvoted, and I think accepted the fact that the majority, 9 clubs, voted for an immediate move to 14. Now we can debate the wisdom of that move till the cows come home, but that's what they're doing. And it's subject to this panel chaired by Lord Kane to decide which 2 clubs, or which 3 clubs, which 2 clubs rather should be elevated into Super League, assuming that they've got the right financial strength and that they've got the squad strength and so on. And Wigan are saying, let's pause this because Wigan claim that there isn't sufficient evidence to show that that's the right thing to do. But the trouble is, I think by serving a letter on Super League Europe, I don't think they've garnered any support, with the possible exception, some people say, of Hull FC. But I don't think they've gained any support from anyone else, and so I don't see that they can be successful in stopping the process. And the process is still moving forward. I mean, all the clubs, there were 9 clubs that put their applications in by September the 12th. It's now September the 24th, so it's 12 days later. And as far as I'm aware, the process is moving forward. And we'll get the announcement in later in October of who the successful clubs will be. So, I'm not sure why Wigan did this. I mean, Mike Danson, the owner of Wigan, is said to prefer a link up with the NRL, which is, perfectly valid thing to want to see. But nonetheless, there's not been any very clear, apart from seeing articles in the Australian media in which Shane Richardson criticises the Super League competition and says it needs completely reorganising and it should just be a 10-team competition. I don't think anybody over here wants that, Jake. I mean, Shane is barking up the wrong tree, really, unfortunately for him. The idea that there should only be 10 clubs in Super League, including 2 French clubs and London Broncos, goes down like a lead balloon if you mention that to most of the other clubs in Super League who might be excluded from that 10-team competition. So I just think there comes a point where when you're barking up the wrong tree, you ought to stop barking, to be honest. And that would be my advice to Shane at this moment, unless he wants to come onto this podcast and explain himself in a bit more detail, which we'd be delighted if he wanted to do, of course. So but I just don't think it's realistic, and I don't think Wigan's stance is realistic either. But obviously, Wigan are entitled to make their own decisions. That's up to them as a club. But I don't think it's. We've now committed to this process, and as I say, that there's plenty of potential to criticise the fact that we're moving to 14 next year. Plenty of people think we might be moving too hastily, but the decision's been made now. So my view is it's been made. It now needs to be made. It now needs to be successful, and let's hope it will be.
That's it. We need to be doing everything we can to make sure that those 2 clubs, if there are 2 deemed suitable to go up to Super League, they get all the support they need to make sure that they thrive.
Yeah, well, we've talked about London Broncos already, and the fact that they seem to be gearing up very strongly for this. And you've got York, you've got Toulouse, you've got Bradford, you've got Oldham, Doncaster. Widnes are still in there. There are plenty of clubs that fancy themselves for this move, and we'll see what happens. And the crucial thing is, one of the crucial things about all of this, though, Jake, and it's something to reflect on, I think, is let's assume we do move to 14 clubs next year. What happens in terms of promotion and relegation after that? That's going to be an important debating point, because we're going to have probably 21 clubs in a combined Championship and League One next year. We need to focus on making that competition viable and exciting and thrilling. And there's got to be a payoff at the end of it for the club that wins the Championship Grand Final. There's got to be some route into Super League for clubs that are not in the 14-team Super League next year. So I think that's going to take a lot of important thinking about, because you've got to make sure that every club, right from the top right to the bottom, is has ambition to reach the maximum level that it's capable of reaching. And in some cases, that means the Championship. Some clubs probably couldn't rise beyond the Championship, but some clubs in the Championship have got the potential to rise further. And that's very important that we bear that in mind, and that those clubs are given an incentive to grow and to get better. And it's amazing. Incidentally, one of the other things I wrote about was Salford and what's going to happen to them, and nobody knows at the moment. But a lot of people are thinking that they might go into liquidation or administration at the end of this year, and hopefully there might be somebody waiting in the wings who could buy them out of administration or create a new club if indeed it went into liquidation. But I made the point that there was an article I read in the Sunday Times this week about Red Bull buying the Newcastle Rugby Union Club, Newcastle Falcons, and Red Bull paid, well, I don't know what they paid to buy them, but they've taken on board £39 million worth of debt. So by buying Newcastle Falcons, they immediately find themselves with a debt of 39 million. And the Falcons' turnover for the last financial year was just over £8.5 million, which is not an awful lot of income, really, for a club in the higher reaches of Rugby Union's Premiership. And, Salford, on the other hand, are said to owe about £3 million compared to Newcastle Falcons' 39 million. Why is it that we've got a rugby league club in the heart of Greater Manchester, right next to the M60 that goes right past the ground? You can see it from quite a long way away. Right in the heart of Manchester, in what most people regard as Britain's second city, and nobody is prepared, seemingly, to buy that club and make it a tremendous success, which it could quite easily be done. If they had the money that no doubt Red Bull will bring to Newcastle Falcons, if Red Bull had been persuaded to buy Salford instead of Newcastle, it would have cost them far less to make a club far more successful than probably Newcastle will ever be. But why doesn't our sport attract that sort of money is the biggest question, I think, ultimately, that we need to think about, because we don't, we're not taken very seriously by some of the major players in the sporting world. That's the problem. And, a club like Salford should be worth a great deal of money if it were managed properly and if it were managed to its full potential. And it's very disappointing to me, as somebody who's got a great soft spot for Salford, that nobody's come in and invested the sort of money that would turn them into a major club.
Yeah, no, well said, mate. I will say, though, if Red Bull were to buy Salford, the name change would probably be a little bit easier. The Salford Red Bulls.
Yeah, Salford Red Devils,
Um,
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
Bradford might not like that proposed change to Bulls, but, there's already
well,
red in that name.
Red
You
Bulls
go
would be yeah.
the Red Bull Devils, maybe.
Yeah, but again,
Um,
maybe Bradford should have been the team they they bought out the Bradford Red Bulls. I mean, that would adding the word red to Bradford would, if a company were going to invest millions of pounds, maybe the supporters could live with that. Who
Yeah,
knows? Who
yeah.
knows?
Who knows? Mate, now, oh yeah, before we get into the NRL finals, because we've touched on the Super League playoffs, but there's just some international allegiances made over the last week or a couple of weeks or so. Tino Fa'asuamaleaui Malawi has pledged his allegiance to Australia, which is great news for me, mate. I was very nervous that he was going to defect to Samoa. But I guess in not so good news, Ethan Strange has he's pledged his allegiance to Australia. So I think
I
there
think
was a bit of talk
despite having a
there.
British mother, yeah, yeah.
And Blake Brayley, I think you were saying, was the other one who um, will opt to play for Australia
His mother
if
comes from
selected.
Liverpool, so yeah, yeah, yes. Well, and I think Blake Brayley is a great player and has been a massive, massive reason for Cronulla's success this year. I think Blake Brayley is. I think potentially he's potentially a better hooker than Harry Grant, and should possibly be the first choice for Australia. But you know, I think he would have been in England's team if he'd declared for England. Put it that way.
Well, yeah, he's definitely in career best form. There's no doubt that he's, if we were to have State of Origin tomorrow, I think he would get picked over Reece Robson at 9 for New South
Oh, I think so.
Wales.
Yes. Yeah.
But yes, I think I think he will make that Australian team somewhere in the
Yeah.
squad. All right, mate. How about we have a look at the NRL preliminary finals this weekend on Friday? It'll be Friday morning your time, Friday night my time. We've got the Melbourne Storm taking on Cronulla Sharks. Who do you like in
I
this one,
believe they've
mate?
sold out that game, haven't they, at Amy Park, which is great to hear. And we've just been talking about Blake Brayley and Harry Grant. Well, here they are in opposition to each other on Friday night. And it'll be worth watching just for that, in my view. I can't wait for that game. And Cronulla's a side that punches above their weight, aren't they? They've got a stadium that's criticised widely by the fans of other clubs. It only holds 12.5, 13,000. And, Cronulla don't really have a centre of excellence in the way that other clubs do. And yet, under Craig Fitzsimons, they just seem to punch above their weight all the time. And they are doing this year, and it wouldn't be a massive surprise to see them overturn Melbourne Storm. In fact, I think I would almost tip them to do so and get to their first grand final since they won it in 2016, which would be a tremendous achievement. And, I don't know what you think, but, nothing surprises me about Cronulla. They're a bit like, like in the English Premier League in football, a team like Bournemouth, only they punch way above their weight. They've also got a stadium that only holds about 12,000 people, which they struggle to fill every week. And yet they're, right up in the upper echelons of the Premier League, while clubs like Manchester United that draw 75,000 are in the lower half of the league. So how on earth they do that, goodness only knows. But Cronulla remind me a bit of them, really. As I say, a club that constantly punches above its weight.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And they've got strike all over the park. Looks like Nico Hines has, found his confidence again. There was a bit of a lull there throughout the year. He's playing really
Well,
well
Hines and
alongside
Trindle
Braden
are half
Trindle.
back. Hines and
Mm,
Trindle, great combination, aren't they?
yeah. And I don't know, I feel like Trindle's almost taken the pressure off Hines a little bit. Obviously Hines wears the 7 jumper, but at times it feels like Trindle's steering that team around and Hines is
Oh yeah,
playing
yeah,
off the back of it.
great player.
Um, so yeah, really interested to watch that match, mate. As a Broncos fan, if Broncos were to get through, I don't know, I feel like Storm is such a dangerous team to play in a grand final because Craig Bellamy has so much experience.
They
I'd
are.
almost like our chances better against the Sharks, but I don't know.
You've
Sharks are
got to
playing
beat the
so good at the
Penrith Panthers
moment.
first, mate, and that's a hell of a challenge. I,
I'm getting ahead
I, I
of
think the
myself,
way
mate.
Penrith are going, they could be the first team to win it from seventh, and that would be the fifth season in a row. I think, I mean, you've got to admire Penrith, and a bit like Wigan in this country, they are so consistent and They know how to peak at the right time. But for the good of the game, I think somebody else needs to win it, and that's no criticism of Penrith. And if Penrith win it again, it'll be remarkable. But I think
Mm.
the idea of them winning it for 5 years in a row. Ooh, eventually you do want to see somebody else, don't you? And obviously, in
Well,
your
that's
case,
it.
Brisbane.
Absolutely, mate. We've got to make up for 2023, and also like it's their sixth straight grand final. So the fact that I mean, if they get through, sorry, it'll be their sixth straight. But the fact that they've just played five in a row, won four of them, they're potentially about to enter their sixth. I don't know if we'll ever see anything like it again.
No, no.
But yeah, in
I
terms of
remember St George
Broncos,
in the 1950s and 60s won it 11 times in a row. So that, maybe Penrith are after beating that record. Who knows?
I hope not. I hope not. But Broncos news: Billy Walters unfortunately drops out of the side. He's got an ACL injury, which has ended his season, which is a shame because he's been playing some really good
Brilliant.
football.
Yeah.
But Adam Reynolds and Ezra Mam are both coming back, have recovered from their hamstring injuries. But Ezra Mam's going to be playing off the bench with Ben Hunt in the halves to partner Reynolds. So interesting to
Well,
see how
it
that
certainly
goes.
is. Yeah, certainly
Yeah.
is. There's no doubt about it. Yeah.
Mm.
By the way,
Anyway, mate.
one other final
Yep.
bit of news from Australia. I see that Mark has said he's going to go back to rugby union in 2027 for their World Cup.
I know. It's a little bit sad to see, given
Oh
how well
yeah,
he's
very.
played. I
Well, hopefully
mean,
he's going to be on the Ashes tour, which will be really interesting actually. And I hope he is, and I hope he gets in the Australian team for that tour because it will help to promote the tour, won't it? With him going back for the Rugby Union World Cup in 2027, assuming he gets picked in the Australian team at that time. But I think he's been a sensational player, and it's funny, because the Roosters lost Joseph Suaalii after last season, but they gained Mark Naka.
Nawangani.
Yes, Mark Nikawaze.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a big
and I
one.
think they got the better of that deal, if I'm honest about
Mm.
it. Joseph Suaalii is a very good player. There's no question about that. But I think the Roosters obviously got Mark for a lot less money than the Australian Rugby Union were paying Joseph, and I think they've got a great deal out of it. He's been absolutely sensational. And interestingly enough, the Roosters started the year with Dominic Young on the right wing, and Mark edged Dominic out of the side, and Dominic went back to Newcastle. So, that's fascinating, isn't it?
That's right. And to think it was a massive gamble for him to leave that Wallaby setup to come to, NRL and test himself. But if anything, he's come over, he's killed it, and now he's probably just doubled his value when it comes to going back to rugby. They're going to have to
Probably
throw some
has.
big
I'm
money
sure
at
they'll have
him.
paid a fortune for him to stay. Yeah, and
Mm.
of course, I mean, it might actually end up in something like French rugby union, because I think the Australian Rugby Union has changed its rules about selecting players who play for overseas clubs. So I think he would be able to play overseas, and earn big money playing rugby union in France, for example, but still qualify to be picked for the Wallabies. So who knows? That's an interesting one, isn't it? But he will be with the
Yeah.
Roosters for another year, which is great, and good luck to him. I hope he has another great year next year, and I hope to see him, as I say, in England this autumn, playing at Wembley and so on.
Absolutely. And hopefully after that World Cup in 2027, we see him back in our sport, mate.
With Joseph Suaalii, who knows?
Mm,
Let's hope. But anyway, we'll see. But there are
absolutely.
plenty of other great players in our sport, fortunately, that we can watch in the meantime. So we're not short of great players, are we?
No, you're not wrong, mate. You're not wrong. All right, Martin. Anything else you want to touch on before we get out of here today, mate?
Well, we've been talking a long time, mate, and let's hope that people are still with us who joined us at the start. But no, I think that covers just about everything, and we've had a good chat, and been great to see you again as always.
Yeah.
And I assume the weather's getting a lot warmer now on the Sunshine Coast, so just as it's getting
Yeah.
cooler over here, and we've
Yeah.
had some rain at last, by the way. We've had some very heavy rain the last week over here, which which we needed to fill the reservoir. So I'm delighted about that. And
Again, it'll always baffle me that the UK can go to drought so quickly. For a
very
place that
much,
rains so much, it just blows
yeah,
my
yeah,
mind.
yeah,
But
yeah.
anyway, all right. Well, to our listeners, enjoy your playoff football this weekend. It's the best time of year to be a rugby league fan, mate, especially if your club's playing in the playoffs. And yeah, mate, we'll wrap it up here and do it again next week, eh?
Great stuff, mate. Great to see you, and thanks a lot, mate.
No worries. Cheers, mate.